How much do you want to bet that most people would probably still go up to Anne Hathaway if she turned out to be a witch? Yeah, I probably would ask her some questions like, how'd you become a witch? Or like, why does your mouth look like that? All the above. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and today we're diving right into Robert Zemeckis' The Witches, debuting exclusively on HBO Max, starring Octavia Spencer and Anne Hathaway. This cast is incredibly stacked, but does this cast make for a really fun time on screen? Now, before I dive into what I liked and what I didn't like about this movie, if it's your first time here at the channel, guys, welcome to Real James, where I review movies and TV shows early just like this. So if you want to get in on all the fun, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell so you don't miss out on anything new. If you haven't already, like this video, guys, and get loud in the comments. I want to know if you've seen the movie, what'd you think? And if you haven't, are you excited to see it this weekend? So if you don't know anything about The Witches, it's based on the 1983 classic novel by Roald Dahl, and I've never read it personally, but it tells the story of a 7-year-old boy who encounters a ton of witches and is now forced to, I guess, survive. It's interesting. And not having seen the 1990 film, I was super curious about this version, and then I took a look at who wrote the script. You have Robert Zemeckis, of course, Kenya Barris, who wrote and also created Blackish, and then you have Guillermo del Toro, and I'm thinking to myself, time out. Are we about to get a really amazing film here? Not really, but before I dive into what I didn't like, guys, let's get into what I liked about The Witches. And what it does well is having a strong start. Octavia Spencer is clearly the standout here, and her interactions with Jazir Bruno were just so dynamic. I loved how heartfelt it was, and it gave me this family-friendly vibe, and I thought to myself, boy, the first 20 minutes of this movie are really strong. It had a very joyful, spooky kind of vibe ripe for Halloween, and that's mainly in part due to the score by Alan Silvestri. If you don't know who he is, go watch an MCU movie. But seriously, he's fantastic, we know that, and his score here is really good. At some points, it's even a main character. I felt like it carried some scenes. And even the pacing seemed pretty good in the beginning as well. We'd get teases of the witches and Anne Hathaway's involvement, but then the movie kind of shifts into another gear, and let's just say it heads into the wrong direction. Unfortunately, I wish there was more to love about this movie outside of Octavia Spencer and even the score, but I can't lie to you guys. After those first 20 minutes, The Witches lacks any heart. The script becomes very shallow, and eventually you start to get a clash of tones. Does it want to be a very cheap, family-friendly movie, or does it want to be kind of smart? And it never balances the two, and eventually it just becomes very uninteresting, and that's a shame for a movie just like this. And yes, I get it, this is intended for kids, and I know, I'm an adult, but I can appreciate kids' movies too, and I almost felt like this movie just wouldn't hold my attention if I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. And Octavia Spencer definitely deserves more than just some cheap one-liners and really bad jokes here and there. She is so great, and I hated the way they used her in that third act. And honestly, what I will say is the CGI was impressive in some moments, but then, guys, we start to see some of the witches and how they transform, and no. So if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned Anne Hathaway yet, it's because even though she's a great actress, I love her in pretty much everything I've seen of hers, in this role, I don't think I bought her performance that much, and it really wasn't very strong. The witch accent that she has is also very interesting for all the wrong reasons. It sometimes felt forced, and in other times it was trying to sell itself as very spooky, and wow, it didn't work. And while she probably had the most impressive prosthetics work and maybe some green screen moments, I don't necessarily think I bought the CGI that they used for her all the time either, and they really tried to sell you on that. This was the main draw for most people, was to see these witches transform, and there's one scene in particular where they focus on, and it comes very early in the movie, which I didn't agree with in terms of placement, but that scene was supposed to be, I guess, the pinnacle of the film in terms of what we can do with CGI, and even then I thought it looked a little cheap. And yes, Anne Hathaway looked a little scary with her mouth and how wide her smile was, and her teeth were super pointy, but they reveal that so early in the movie that when they show it later on, it just doesn't hold any value. And then there's the story, which is very bland. I mean, even for a kid's movie, it's bland. So I have to ask myself, what happened to Robert Zemeckis? The last movie I've seen of his was Welcome to Marwen, which was about a couple of years ago with Steve Carell. The premise of that movie was it was good, right? But the thing is, the execution was awful, and by the end, I was not a fan of that film. And unfortunately, he's 0 for 2, and I don't get it. What happened to Robert Zemeckis? And this movie felt like it was also over-explaining certain things, especially about the witches themselves. There was lots of expositional dialogue in that first act with Octavia Spencer and her character's grandson, and I didn't care for it. It almost felt like it was talking down to me. Why don't you just show us what the witches look like instead of literally revealing everything through dialogue before we get to the witch reveal, which honestly undermines everything. So I was confused about where the script was going by the end. So overall, you guys, The Witches is one film that started off so strong, but after that just took a nosedive. It was very uninteresting, and unfortunately the story is two-dimensional, where it could have probably had more layers to it. The film is ripe for being a very fun, family-friendly Halloween movie, and I'm sure people will come out for this movie on HBO Max. However, I think if they're anything like me in terms of wanting that family fun environment, you're going to walk away disappointed because it resorts to a lot of cheap thrills, and eventually when the movie ends, I scratched my head and thought, boy, did they really just take a 180 after a strong first half? So what gives? And speaking of that ending, I'm not going to spoil anything, but boy, did it have this generic feel. Like, we've seen endings like this before. I didn't expect that from The Witches. The trailer was fun. I thought all of the photos that I saw beforehand, they looked good. You know, all the CGI work looked solid. But honestly, not only was the CGI unimpressive, I think it was just the film itself. It's very bland, and I just don't think it will be very memorable this Halloween season. So if you want a fun film to watch during Halloween time, I recommend just going back and watching some classics, because unfortunately The Witches didn't fill my appetite, and it might not fill yours either. Alrighty guys, well there you have it. That's my real review of The Witches, a movie that I wish I could tell you was so good, but unfortunately it's just not. And I really do think that if the script maybe was reworked a little bit and maybe they had less hands in the pot, it could have been a more cohesive movie. But I want to know what you guys have to think, so go ahead and get loud in the comments below and let me know if you liked it or if you didn't. And if you haven't already, guys, go ahead and hit the big red button below and subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 3,000 subscribers, and we got a big week coming up, and I can't wait to spend it with all of you. Alrighty, well, let me go get working on that, and I should probably go watch Scream. That sounds good. Alrighty, y'all, again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.